Welcome, everybody. So glad you could join us for this month's virtual event. Just excited for the conversation we have in store and that you guys could be here. My name is Luke Burgett. I'm with the medicalmissions.com team. And, our desire for these virtual events and everything that we do between conferences in November is just to equip you with content for best practices to be effective in missions and really to clarify your journey from wherever you are now to wherever you feel the Lord may be calling you to serve in the future. We want to provide you with tools and resources and connections with others that can help you to get from here to there. And we do that through these virtual events, through blog posts and e-courses and a number of other things that experts in the community here at Medical Missions are willing to just kind of share their knowledge and their wisdom and their experience after a lifetime of service on their own. And so tonight we're talking with Pastor Doug Christgau from MedSend, and he's just going to be sharing a wealth of knowledge here on how to make short-term mission trips effective. Maybe talking a little bit about kind of how to make them ethical and really looking at how short-term trips really fit the medical missions landscape and how we can make the most of those. So, Doug, so glad that you're here with us. Just a pleasure to speak with you, and I'd love for you to take a moment and share just a bit about yourself and maybe a bit about MedSend as well.
Sure. So I have been involved with missions since 1985 when I became a missions pastor at a church in Connecticut that was very missions active. And I have been on over 100 mission trips, actually, because that's part of what missions pastors do. And I did that for 35 years. So I have a pretty broad breadth of experience in short-term mission trips. And as far as medical trips, I've been on probably a dozen or so. So that's one segment of the experience that I've had. My connection with MedSend began because in that first church where I was a missions pastor, there was an oral surgeon who saw that many doctors who had an interest in going into missions had an issue of paying off their educational debt. And so he started MedSend specifically to pay the educational debt of healthcare professionals who wanted to go into missions. So that was our start in 1993. And in the ensuing years, we've added a number of other layers to our ministry. We do specialized member care for medical missionaries who are on the field. They have special needs relative to seeing so many patients and having a very significant professional burden while they're on the field. So we provide something called longevity to help them to be encouraged and stay on the field. And then we also fund African and Asian physicians. We pay for their residency programs. In those regions, residents don't get paid. They have to pay for the program. So MedSend has paid for about 100 African and Asian physicians to gain residency training in specialties like surgery and family medicine.
That's incredible. So pretty holistic approach there. I love seeing the ways that MedSend is just knocking down barriers for people. That whole vision of helping pay that medical school debt. I mean, that's a primary inhibitor for people graduating, putting all this work and effort into their preparation and med school, and then want to go serve, having all that debt such a burden. And so to have a ministry that can help alleviate some of that and help them get there, just incredible. Very, very cool.
Yeah, I love serving in this ministry because the recipients of our grants are so grateful and they're so enthused to be able to get on the field. And we've actually paid off about 700 loans over our 30 years.
My goodness. Yeah, no, that's incredible. Well, thanks for sharing. As we get into kind of more of the meat of our discussion here, every year we see so many mission trips being taken by universities and trips, or universities and churches, right? Everybody's sending trips because they kind of feel like it's what they should be doing. They have a missions department, or whatever. They need to have bodies of people that want to be serving in various ways, and so they organize and orchestrate trips. But a lot of times fail to ask a critical question, like, why do we send people on short-term trips? And so, based on your background of leading over 100 trips and being so involved in this for so long, how would you answer that question? Why take a short-term trip?
Well, that's a very good place to begin. And I do think that there's sort of a tendency to say, oh, that's the first thing everybody should do is go on a trip. And it's great to have that enthusiasm and that vision. But yes, I think missionary trips have definitely have the potential to go sideways or even backwards, unless there's some good thinking on this issue of why. So I'll name a couple of ideas, and
Yeah.
the first one, and in my opinion, by far the most important, is that we go on trips to encourage the missionary host. We may have the idea that we're going to do some great thing, especially medical trips. There'll be providers who can provide care and examine people and all of that, and that's good. But we need to start with, well, who's organizing the trip for us on that end? Who's hosting us? We sometimes fail to realize that there's a fair amount of effort that goes into preparing for trips, and we just sort of assume, well, it must be easy because we're so enthusiastic about going. So we try to encourage our trip participants. And again, I'm speaking from a local church trip perspective, but this would be true for campus trips as well. We first talk about how we can encourage the missionary host that is preparing to have us, whether it's a Western missionary, which I've done many times, or a national worker, and I've done those a number of times. So a couple of ways that we can demonstrate our desire to encourage the host is basically to come prepared. There should be meetings, there should be efforts to orient people to the trip, to the culture, to the religious environment in which we're going to be moving when we do our trip. So we just need preparation. I mean, it's not much different than a lot of other things in life, but you just don't run into a trip. And the host can generally tell when the group is prepared or whether they've just sort of thrown something together and bought some airplane tickets.
Right.
Another way we can encourage the missionary in going on the trip is to be positive. Again, it's easy to observe things here and there that may not be to our liking, but if we're there to encourage the host, then we need to be positive. Notice what's good. Notice what's encouraging to us or what we're learning. Express those kinds of things, and then finally be humble. We as Americans especially think sort of we got it together, and we're helping out the rest of the world with all their problems.
Right.
And to a degree, that's true, but that's certainly not what we want to communicate. We want to come as servants. We want to come as learners, and we want to listen more than we talk. So those are some of the positive ways that we can encourage.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I love that how you said listen and learn, in order to serve. So coming alongside these organizations and recognizing, we're not just swooping in to like save the day, so to speak, but they're actually
Absolutely.
right effectively doing a lot of work themselves already, and have prepared in a lot of ways to even host us. And so coming with a heart to serve them and their agenda, and to really seek to encourage them in that process, realizing how much work they've put in to host a team is so important. It's great insight.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, go ahead.
So there's a couple of things not to do, and there to a degree they're flip side of what I've already said. But We want to really watch our complaining. You know, the bed may not be just the way you like it, or the bugs may be more
Right.
numerous than you expected, or the heat might be oppressive compared to what you're used to. But all these things, they're only going to be there as for the week or the 2 weeks that you're going to be there. So
Yeah.
an easy way to sort of cancel the complaining is simply to realize whatever it is, it's going to be a couple of days or and you're going to be home again. I mean, mission trips are short, and so they certainly can be endured for whatever discomfort might come. There's also the attitude of condescension. You know, I sort of know what I'm doing here. It's especially true if you've got a skill like a healthcare provider. You
Right.
do things a certain way. You know how to do them. You've done them many times, but the Nationals may have another approach. They may have another way to do it, and so you listen to them and
Hmm.
try to follow their lead, or at least come up with a compromise, so that we're not just condescending towards we've got to figure it out, and you guys are just you're just getting started. And then the third, and this is potentially the most volatile, is just leave your personal agendas
Hmm.
uh, at home. And one of the areas in which this can happen, I'm sure it happens on college trips. It's happened on my church trips. It's romance. It's, hey, what I'm
Hmm.
really looking for here is to connect with this particular guy or girl that I got my eye on. And frankly, I've had some horrible things
Oh my
happen.
goodness. I can imagine.
Once even between two married people who
Hmm.
found an interest in each other, and that was
My goodness.
harrowing. It wasn't just a
Well,
bit of a problem.
definitely not something
And
you expected on your mission trip.
yeah, right. And then there are tourist ambitions. You want to see a certain site. Or one time I had folks on the Autobahn in Germany, and they wanted to be sure that they went 120 miles an hour. You know, this was a big deal to them. They'd never been that fast in a car. Well, that's completely off topic. But yet
Yeah.
I had to calm them down and say, we're going to keep it at 90 here. This is the Autobahn, and but we're not breaking it to three figures on this on the speedometer. So who knows what the agendas might be? But again, you got to remember you're in a team effort, and you put those things aside for the sake of the ministry that you're going to perform.
Yeah, for the sake of the ministry. Yeah, so it sounds like a kind of an overarching theme here is humility and service to kind of be the heart
Absolutely.
posture as a team.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Any other reasons come to mind for why we would take short term trips?
Yeah, we certainly want to keep in mind the ministry to the nationals. Now that might be like prevalent in our minds. Yeah, we're going there to help people, and again, we've got to watch that, what we mean by that word, and not suggest that somehow we're better or more advanced than they are. Um,
Right.
but we also want to recognize that the nationals might have approaches that we're not accustomed to. In medical trips in particular, I noticed this, that a lot of times we served refugees with medical needs, and that was something that was certainly in the agenda of the host missionary. But we discovered that refugees tend to get up late. They frankly they haven't got a lot on their plate in terms of responsibilities and activities. And so, we're ready to go at 8 a.m. sharp. That's when, the workday starts in most places in the US. But with
Right.
the Nationals, they might not roll in till about 10 o'clock. So you go with that. And again, you don't criticize these people are lazy or whatever. They don't really care about their physical needs. And you just go with that. Um,
Hmm.
another situation is regarding spiritual needs. Now, again, we're Christian people. We have a message of the gospel besides our healthcare contribution. And uh, I remember on some trips, some of my trip members, like, they wanted to share the gospel like the first day. Like, we're here, we're here to bring people to Jesus. So where's the first
Yeah.
guy I can talk to?
Let's start preaching.
So you just have to kind of put the brakes on that, and you need to be sensitive back again to the host, and just recognize a lot of times the host is the one that's going to have the spiritual ministry, because they know the people, they know the culture, they know the language, all of those variables they've got well in hand while you're struggling to get through, Buenos Dias or whatever it is for your language training. So the ministry to the nationals is the second critical step. And then the third is the spiritual growth of TRIP members. And I want to put it clearly as third because if you've ever gone to a mission trip reunion or you've read a report, so often people say, well, I went there to minister to people, but really I got so much more out of it myself. Well, that might be true, but that's not why you go. And I have literally heard some church leaders say the reason we do mission trips is to disciple our people. Well, that's just kind of backwards. That's not why we go to the mission field to help ourselves, even in the spiritual area. And there are a host of other ways in the United States that you can disciple people. So certainly you will grow if you approach the trip with the right attitude, and you will see gains in your spiritual life. That's all to the good, but that's not why we go. And it just gets to me anytime I hear that little testimony, which I've heard 100 times, because I'm thinking, oh, that's fine, but that's third. That's not first as far as why you go.
Yeah, I appreciate you intentionally putting that third, right? Like that is a byproduct of going on these trips is, growing spiritually. But if that's kind of front and center for the why, for the why, then you're automatically kind of sacrificing that heart of service and humility and willingness to take their lead and to enter into their environment and to really care for and serve them and kind of their approach to things. I remember going on a trip to Mexico City. I was leading the trip, and you're totally right. The host had all of the spiritual insight. We would gather the team together with him and the host family that was there, and we'd just circle up and have a time of devotion together. And those were some of the most impactful moments, even just in my own spiritual journey, and something I'm so grateful for. But we would have missed so many things had that been the reason that we went, and just sacrificed a lot of impactful projects that we were working on if we were just there for that spiritual development. So I appreciate you pointing that out.
Yeah. I mean, you'd never say this, but in a sense, it's like you're going on a trip saying, "What's in it for me?"
Right.
What's in it for me?
Yeah.
It's just not why you go. It's just a wonderful byproduct when you focus on the host and the nationals that you're trying to serve.
So important. Yeah. So good. Yeah. So, any other like final thoughts on that question that we're talking about here?
Yeah. I also want to mention that a benefit of going on a trip, but it would be the fourth reason is that your church or your campus can be encouraged in their own missions interest. They can be informed better as you come home and share your stories and tell about what happened on the trip. And we'll go more into detail regarding what a trip celebration looks like as we get towards the end of this podcast. But the idea that the church can advance in missions or the campus interest in missions increases. Yeah, that's a real possibility. And again, it comes as you give testimony to your own changed life and what happened on the trip.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I look forward to tuning in a little bit more about the kind of post-trip activities and team celebration and things like that here in a bit. We'll come back to that for sure. Let's shift gears a little bit here. Can you walk us through, from start to finish, kind of a chronological approach to conducting an effective short-term trip?
Sure. We start, like I mentioned earlier, with before the trip actually takes place, you do some preparation. You get together. Now, again, I know this primarily in a church context, and our formula pretty much was 5 2-hour meetings. That was the amount of time that we could reasonably expect the average person in the church to commit to getting ready. And on a campus, it might be different. You've got more of a captive audience, so to speak, people on a campus. So you may have more meetings, more time than this. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm just saying that from a church point of view, you hold these meetings at the same time, same place, um, starting them about probably 6 weeks before you actually go on the trip. And then you have 4 sessions so that when you finish, you've got 2 weeks to go. You have one more meeting, which is focused on logistics, and then you go. And so that's sort of the time allotment that we see as working well for preparation. And then as far as how you get ready, my orientation is that my staff and I have always prepared for these trips, but you could hire a mission trip organization, an organization that specializes on mission trips. I've been on some college campuses because I go to college campuses for MedSend, and I've heard them referring to certain agencies that all mission trips are going to be organized by such and such an agency, and that's fine. It adds another layer of expense, but that's another way to go about it. And the preparation for going on a trip really it's centered around a number of dynamics. One again is this whole issue of why we spend usually pretty much a whole session just talking about the why. But then we get into the skills that we're going to be using. In the case of the medical teams, that's pretty easy to anticipate, but there are some technical aspects where you've got to figure out, well, how many syringes do we have to take? How much medicine do we take from here? How much should we purchase over there? There are pieces you get into. If you do dentistry, my goodness, it becomes really explosive because they need to bring so many things to make their end of things work. But that again, that's why you get together. You talk about these things in detail. You delegate. You take care of these supplies. I'll take care of these meds, and you get yourself organized to go. And then another piece of it is having people who have gone in the past to share their stories, inspire each other spiritually. We can pray together. We oversee support raising. Again, this may vary from campus to church. In a campus, I've noticed there's a lot of general support raising, like they'll take an offering at a chapel service, and that goes towards the mission trips. That's great. Most of the financial preparation in a church is people raising individual support. They raise the $2,000 for the trip or whatever it is from their friends and family. But there's a certain way to go about that. It's not that difficult, but it's another area of prep that needs to be timely and needs to be thought out. And so getting together for trip meetings helps us to keep up on all of these aspects of the trip ministry.
Yeah, and then finally, actually going on the trips. There's a lot of work, it sounds like, on the front end of just preparing everybody to be on the same page about why we're going, maybe dealing a lot with those expectations people have, maybe some of the personal agendas they have, and doing a lot of that pre-work ahead of time to prepare people for that heart of humility and service before you go. And then, really diving into the weeds of preparing and getting the nuts and bolts together and making sure that you're equipped. So, and then if you're a dentist, maybe choose your specialty wisely for these trips, depending on how much work you want to put in the planning phases. But no, it sounds like a very intentional approach to taking a team on a short-term trip rather than just kind of piecemealing things together and then just buying plane tickets and going, like being intentional about that process, even to the extent of potentially hiring an agency to help with that process, it sounds like. So yeah, that's thanks for sharing those details. You started talking a bit about the financial aspect, and we were talking about that initially, right? MedSend helps with tuition bills that students have as they graduate and want to move into mission work. And as people sign up to go on short-term trips, that fundraising piece is just another barrier. It's kind of that many of you here are tuning in can probably identify, like, the reason I haven't gone on a trip yet is because I'm afraid of the fundraising part. I don't want to ask for funds, or so can you walk us through support raising, and what wisdom do you have to share there?
Yeah, I love this topic because
Yeah.
I've raised my own support for every trip that I've ever gone on. There are some missions pastors that might take it out of the missions budget, and that's their decision. But I always felt that I didn't want to take away from money that was essentially devoted to long-term missions, like our supported 30 or 40 missionaries. I didn't want to take money away from those guys so that I could go on my 2-week trip. So the basics of this are certainly prayer. Again, I don't want to just say that because I got to check that box, as a Christian pastor. But we do say, hey, you joined this trip hopefully because you felt led by the Lord to do it. Then you pray for the physical means that are necessary to go, and certainly part of that is the finances. And then typically, if you can identify about 20 friends and family members who are willing to read a 300-word letter from you describing your trip and describing your need, and you keep in contact with those folks. You may follow up with them personally, but typically a letter that's clearly written and well timed, giving people enough time to respond, is going to produce the $2,000 to $3,000 that the typical trip is going to cost. So it's just clear communication, prayer, identifying who you can speak with, and there in churches at least there needs to be some coordination, because there are certain people in the church who sort of get a reputation for being willing to help those who go on mission trips, but they can't get 6 letters, from 6 out of the 12 people on the trip. So a little bit of coordination on that is needed, and we usually handle that by saying, think first about your personal family network and even your non-Christian network, because especially with medical trips, when you're going to do something that's meeting a physical need like this, there will be non-believers who think it's a great idea, and will give you some financial help. Another piece of this and this happens before you go on the trip, is each time you receive $25 or $100, whatever it might be, you express appreciation to the individual. You never ever just take for granted, oh yeah, $50, that's nothing to that particular individual, but it is something. It's a commitment they're making that is not part of their regular giving, and so you want to just recognize that. So we teach expressing appreciation promptly, even before you go on the trip, and then we tell people, this is in the last session, that send a note to everyone who has financially supported you and give them 3 prayer requests for your time away. Thanks for the funding. I'm at my 2,000 goal or whatever the amount is, and here's what's going to happen on the trip. And again, concisely and briefly, I keep it in 3s, maybe 1 praise and 2 prayer requests, something like that. But you express that to your supporters, so as they go, as you go, they know, okay, this is happening, because their lives are busy too. They might have written a check a month before and sort of forgotten about it. But you're coming back to them just before you leave to say, thanks for helping, and here are some spiritual issues that you can remember. So I know some people think, oh, asking for money, it's such a drag, or it's so embarrassing, or whatever it is, but I can just tell you that it's a source of joy. And I'm certainly at the age and stage where I could write my own check to go. I could do that, but I still raise the money. Not because I desperately need it, and I think my supporters understand that, but because I want the investment of others in the trip, and I think it ensures stronger prayer support if people have, given you some kind of a gift financially to go. I
Yeah.
could talk about that a long time. So maybe I,
No, I love your perspective on that. It isn't just a simple, it's not as simple as just asking people for money. It's a whole part of the ministry that's happening, right? Even to the extent of talking to, your non-Christian support system too. I mean, the nature of healthcare missions is almost anybody can get behind that type of work, whether they like share that same kind of mission mindset as you, but it's an opportunity again for you to invite somebody into that process, which may have, those are just seed planting opportunities, right?
right.
And not to mention how much it's a gift for people to be able to give, to participate in something that maybe they otherwise wouldn't be able to. Maybe they can't go on a trip themselves for whatever reason, but the fact that you're inviting them into that process with you gives them an opportunity to serve and to support in ways that they'd like to. So
Right.
great insight
One,
there.
one one other thing I just want to add is in medical trips in particular, you you've got to provide medicines. You may be recommending lab procedures that'll be done in some local facility where you're working. That can run as much as $10,000, at least for the trips that we ran. We'd have basically like 15 participants. They'd be there for doing care for 6 days, and we would typically bring about 10 grand, and we would give that to a pharmacy that's local so that the people can go and get their drugs without having to pay for them. And then we would, through the host, we would pay for lab procedures at a local hospital or a clinic. So there's a lot of money there. And for those that feel free to write their own check, and frankly, a lot of healthcare professionals, they're going to write the check to go, the 2,000, 3,000. They're not going to miss it, but they can go and talk to their contacts about this bigger issue of how we can fund the actual ministry we're going to do, not just fund our plane fares and
Yeah.
hotel costs and that kind of thing.
Right. So yeah, so there's that extra layer of the support
Right.
goes beyond
So
just
for
getting you there. Yeah.
medical trips especially. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about locations. So, what goes into selecting a trip location for these short-term trips?
That's pretty easy, really. We always recommend going to a place where we know the host. We support the host through our missions budget. Um, they've been to our church to talk about their ministry, and so we typically would go to a host. It can be a Western missionary who's got an ongoing work in a certain area of the world. And then we've also gone with nationals. I really like that um, because we're submitting ourselves to the national leaders, and we're already supporting them on our missions budget. But to actually go and do things their way in their time, um, I just like that because again, it doesn't make us you know, the Americans who are, in charge of everything. And this has even gone to the extent that we twice had nationals cancel our trips, and we had gone to a lot of work and some expense to get ready, and they just, certain circumstances came up, and they said it's just not going to work. So we said, okay, we accept that. We weren't happy with it, but we were very respectful of what nationals told us. And it's another aspect about location is simply, in the U.S. we're just so obsessed with safety, and I understand there are certain reasons to be concerned, but by and large, you go with the host. The host is the one who says it's okay to be here. And in the Central American and Caribbean locations that occupy probably 80% of mission trips, it's pretty easy. Although I have been in countries where we had to take a different route to the airport because there was civil unrest in downtown, that kind of thing. But
Right.
again, what we go with is what's the national telling us. And those trips that were canceled, those were trips to the Middle East. They were trips areas that might be volatile, and they became volatile during our preparation. And again, we honored the judgment of the national host, who was actually from Jordan, and we just went with what he had to say. And it wasn't about Jordan; it was about a region of that region of the world where they had many ministries going that we might have been able to help.
Yeah. Yeah. So go with the national there and just
Absolutely.
take their lead.
Yeah. I mean, you can go to the U.S. government, State Department website, but essentially they don't want you to go to any place that has the slightest possibility of a problem. And that's a bit of overkill, at least again, I've always had the host would be the one that would make the final judgment, not the State Department.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's a pretty big need for long-term relationship with these people, right? We're doing short-term trips, but having that longer-term relationship with the people you're going to serve and work with sounds like an important aspect there as well.
Yeah, there's one site that we're going to it again this year. I'm still part of my church, even though I'm not on the church staff anymore. And I think this will be our 40th time that we've gone there in 20 years. So we
That's
basically
awesome.
spent 2 years, two teams a year for 20 years. And so that's fantastic. And in the interim, one of our own members became a long-term missionary and is now our host there. So
Very
somebody who was on the mission trips became the long-term missionary who's
yeah.
who's hosting us. And then in the Middle East, again, a lot of people would say, "Oh, I wouldn't dare go to the Middle East." Well, that's your decision. I'm not here to tell you that you should, but we go with a national group in the Middle East, and we've been there about 10 times and had one or two of the trips canceled, but we've been there successfully 8 or 9 times.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, what greater impact to continue returning to the same location, working with the same ministry rather than kind of just randomly, going different places all the time.
Yeah, go on mission trips and see the world, right?
Right. Yeah. Because again, that's more about you than that heart of humility and service. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So yeah. So we've talked a bit about all these trip planning pieces and have all that stuff in place. So let's start focusing a bit on the team itself. What's the best approach to preparing each person on a team to go?
Well, a big aspect of that would be asking them to identify some goals for themselves. This would come maybe about 60% of the way through the training. They've had several sessions, they've gotten some information, and then we say, well, what are 3 things that you think God might want to do through you or in you through this trip? And so we talk about them, and that becomes the basis for discussion after the trip, because with the foresight, they make certain goals, and then with hindsight, they can evaluate to what degree those were good goals and to what degree they were reached, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then again, we really stress prayer. We tell people during the meetings, one thing that might shock you is that we sort of expect you to pray out loud. And for some Christian folks, that's just a big hurdle. But
Yeah.
we actually give them training in how to pray out loud. Start with just one sentence and those kinds of things. So prayer really is a big deal, and I'm not just saying that, again, to make it a Christian activity. We think it's central to the trip moving forward, and then teaching taboos. There are certain things that Westerners tend to do that are just not accepted, and this might sound silly, but a long-term missionary in the Dominican Republic said that the worst taboo is that the way women dress when they go to the DR. These are Christian women, but their style is revealing by the standards of those folks in the Dominican. And she actually told us, think about what was accepted in U.S. Christianity in the 50s, and that's what's accepted in this country for Christians now. So basically, I'm not saying the guys are like completely free, like the guys are not supposed to take their shirts off. If they be in construction or some kind of activity, they're really hot, but we never allow them to take their shirts off because that would be offensive. And again, for girls, you can imagine there are various limitations they need to honor. And then in some cultures, I mean, it sounds, again, it's kind of silly. Once I was sitting on a desk, I was teaching. This wasn't a medical trip, it was an educational trip. And I was sitting on a desk in a Muslim area, and I moved my foot, and that gave a slight exposure to the sole of my foot. I didn't even realize it. And
Yeah.
then somebody in the class said, "What are you doing? What are you doing showing your foot like that?" I thought she was kidding. And then I remember, oh, yeah, that's right. Back in our time, we said the sole of the foot is something not to be exposed. So
Yeah.
you never know. But we try to teach 2 or 3 taboos, and we try to teach 4 or 5 phrases. We're not about to teach the language, but what are 4 or 5 phrases that will sort of get you by, how to say hello, how to say goodnight, how to say excuse me, how to say where's the bathroom. These very simple kinds of things. We teach those, again, as a matter of respect to the culture. Not that we couldn't ask the missionary where's the bathroom in English and they tell us, but rather we're honoring where we are by learning those few phrases. Nobody's suggesting we're trying to be fluent, but we're trying to be respectful of the place where we are.
Yeah, fits right into that theme. It's like the red thread of this conversation is
Yeah.
the heart of service, right? And laying yourself down for the good of where you're going and the people you're going to serve. And yeah, I mean, it's such great insight there, and I can see how important just some cultural awareness is in that process. Doing some work ahead of time to learn about where you're going and be prepared to enter into that cultural context sounds critical.
Yeah, we do a fair amount of work on the spiritual state of the country. If you know the Operation World book, or now it's an app as well, but the Operation World will tell you what that country is like, spiritually speaking. And we always review that, and we pray over some of the prayer requests that Operation World provides. So when we go in there, we pretty much understand where we're going. And
Yeah.
it's not like we're mispronouncing the name of the capital and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. No, that's great. Any other books that you recommend people to read as they're preparing themselves, or maybe that you take a team through?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Short-Term Mission Workbook by Tim Dearborn. I think it's in Varsity Press. It's a wonderful guide, and I checked with a professional colleague of mine about sources, and he named the same one. So I feel
Yeah.
especially safe ground. I've used that many times. Tim Dearborn's book on short-term missions workbook. There's another one that there's a group called Standards of Excellence, SOE, and SOE.org, and they will provide you with standards for running a trip. I believe it's 7 different standards. So that's a great source, and all this humility and going as a servant, all that stuff is reinforced if you would follow their guidelines.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, thanks for those resources. That'll be helpful. So, how about during the trip? Can you identify some critical aspects for success during the trip once everybody's there?
Yeah, there's sort of 3 phases to it that, as I see it, you've got the initial stage, which is the most nerve-wracking, at least if you're a leader, and that's when you're gathering the people at the place from which you're going to leave for the airport, assuming this is most mission trips involve flights. So you've got to get that group together on time to leave. In our case, we're about 2 hours from the airport that we typically use, and there's some traffic because we go down to the New York City area. And I've had so many tense moments when trip participants didn't like show up on time. So
Yeah.
you get them there on time, you get them to the ticket gate, and then again, this is a leader's perspective, you stand by that desk as each person gets checked in to make sure everything is right. And of course, you've already prepped that everybody got their passport, they've got a visa if that's necessary, and you check all those boxes off. But you've got to get everybody in, and then when They get on the plane and then they get to the place. Then you've got this transition, this adjustment of where we're sleeping and what we're doing. And usually it's about a day before you actually get into the activity itself. And I find that in my scheduling of things, it's usually a Saturday to Saturday trip. And from Saturday when we leave till Monday when we start working at whatever it is, whether it's a clinic or some other kind of program, it drives me nuts. It's just the hardest time. And then you get into the rhythm of things after the first day. People sort of get used to whatever they're doing. Again, medical work, and the patient line gets organized and whatnot. So that's good. You've got basically from Monday to Thursday afternoon, Friday, and then Friday everything's packed up, everything's checked off. We've got all the prescriptions out. We've done everything we're going to do. Then we got to get to the airport and get home. That's like the third phase. So I am speaking from a leadership point of view, but you can remember it even if you're just a participant, that the big time to really be cooperative and helpful is in the beginning.
Okay.
And then you enjoy the middle. That's when things just sort of start feeling pretty good. And then mission trips are so short, just about the time you're really enjoying that, it's time to, whoops, we got to go through another transition here, button everything up and, get everybody home safe. So those are the three phases or the three rhythms that I've identified.
No, that's great. Yeah. So how about on the topic of responding to the host culture? You've done some work on the front end, learning a few phrases here and there, learning some, taboos culturally speaking. But when you're there, anything that you'd say to people, best practices for responding to the host culture when your, boots are on the ground?
Yeah, this is so important. And the idea is engagement. You didn't go on this trip to spend more time with your friends from the States. You went on this trip to serve nationals. And almost all the cultures that we're going to are more relational than our culture. So if you hang back and don't talk to them, they don't know how to take that. And usually they're going to lean towards the negative, like, oh, there's something wrong with me. The nationalist thinking. That's why they're not coming and speaking. Now, you could just be nervous or you're not that outgoing, or you might have your own reasons, but the nationalists thinking there's rejection or there's somehow they must think they're better than we are. And unfortunately, they often think you probably are better than them because you come from this rich country and you've got all this money and you feel you seem to be so much more advanced than they are. So we always tell our folks on our team, if it's a church service, if it's a clinic, if it's a meeting where there are nationals and folks from our team together, in all of those times, take the initiative, ask some questions, even if the question might seem kind of silly or you're going to try to say it in their language and you foul up the pronunciation, just give it a shot because that's a sign of affirmation to them. They know you're trying, and then they're going to try to answer back again. This is a time, when the language might be a barrier, but just even if they speak English, which a lot of times some of them do, just go to them and don't hang back. Don't find comfort with your team. Go out there and relate. So again, it's kind of ironic because we would say, well, that's why we go on trips. We want to help or at least interact with the nationals. And then when the moment of truth comes, we're all pulling back and hanging on to the apron strings of our best friend.
Yeah, so get out there. It's gonna push you outside of your comfort zone. It sounds like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's comfort zone.
And
Right.
you lean into that process and you take that initiative, even if it kind of goes against the grain of your natural wiring. And I think I'm glad you pointed out the expectations that may be in place that already kind of give you a hurdle to get over in that way in the beginning, right? They may see you as, they may see you in a certain light. And if we do things that kind of reinforce this idea that we think we're better than you, right, by not engaging, by not really accepting the fact that we need to push outside of our comfort zone, that can really be detrimental. So, so glad you brought that up.
And again, there are certain cultural things like our sense of space when we speak to each other, there's a certain distance between us. But in some countries, that distance is cut by 50% or more. And there you can practically, feel the saliva from them talking to you.
Yeah.
But that's the way they do it. So stay there, don't worry
Yeah.
about a couple of particles of moisture, hitting you in the face while
It's going to
they're
be all right.
telling you their story. Uh, you just go ahead. And, you try to get to the point where you can kind of laugh at it and enjoy it. But even if you don't, just get yourself to do it. I
Yeah.
mean, I am quite an introverted individual by nature, but I just know step across that room and give it a shot.
Right. Yeah.
Nine times out of 10, it works out just fine.
And you're better for it in the end, anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of ways that mission trips are going to challenge you and kind of ask you to push beyond your limits a little bit, and a lot of ways that trips are going to develop you. And so we've talked a bit about the idea of spiritual growth opportunities that come for team members on these trips. And keeping in mind, like we talked about before, not allowing that to be the reason that you're going is for that spiritual growth, but instead, let's look at that as something that does happen on these trips, and how is the benefit of spiritual growth most likely to be realized for team members?
It sounds so fundamental, but the first thing that comes to my mind is being punctual, being on time for a good mission trip is going to have a group devotional time every day, and it's going to be probably 30, 45 minutes. And being there on time for that activity is most important. I talked before about praying together and trying to learn how to pray out loud. If that's a challenge for you, then just give it the best shot you can to pray, and then just speak up if the leader is saying, do you have any observations from today, or do you see how this Bible passage applies in the situation we're dealing with in this trip? Just try to say what's on your mind. And a good leader will try to draw in those that are reticent and try to limit the motor mouths in the group. And but you'll get the most out of it. It sounds so prosaic, but when you put yourself into it. And I have literally had people finish a trip and say, I've never read the Bible every day, but we did it on this trip. And I'm going to start doing that when I go home. This is better than I expected, to read the scriptures. It's a whole lot more of a blessing than I expected it to be. And so you carry that home. I mean, I literally had people that have begun a quiet time, or they've continued it from doing it on the trip, and then doing it as they've gone home.
Yeah.
I think another thing is just your courage to share your faith. The easy way is you go to a church service, you're the Americans, they love having these American guests, and then they want you to share your testimony, your story of your relationship with Jesus. Again, for some, that'd be like the first time they've ever done it. Good training would typically involve at least a couple of people sharing their testimony before you go on the trip itself. But once you get out there and you're standing up in front of a bunch of nationals, then you share your faith. And again, it's a supportive environment. We're not talking about evangelism here. Most of the time, this is a church service, but being willing to do that makes a big difference. Or even preach a sermon. I mean, I have been the leader on a lot of trips. It's been more than once that they say, "Oh, Pastor so and so is here. Come on up and give us a message." Well, they're not talking about 5 minutes; they're talking about 40 minutes. So
Yeah.
you do those things when the average trip member is not going to have to do that, but it's typical of the stretching kinds of things that you just go with. And again, the environment is so overwhelmingly positive. I mean, the nationals are so much in your corner. They so much want to get to know you and find out more about you and hear you talk. So it's a pretty safe place in which to take those risks.
Yep. And again, just to lean into that. That's where the good stuff is going to come. Yeah, I know Will Rogers was sharing a story of a time he he was on a trip and just randomly was asked to give a sermon, like you were saying. Didn't have anything prepared, or as we think about it here, our pastors here at churches that we attend, they're spending hours during the week preparing their Sunday message, and here off the cuff, they're like, "Hey, come give the message today." And so, I mean, just so funny, like those experiences. I know I was a worship leader for a long time, and did a trip to Kenya, and was asked with kind of on a moment's notice. I had like maybe just a short time to prepare, but you're going to be leading worship here for this service, and had nothing with me. And I didn't have song. I'm not very good at memorizing songs and things, and so this definitely kind of pushed me outside of my comfort zone. But just such a great thing to look back on those experiences when you're willing to lean in. So cool. Now, a lot of these people on short-term trips are, these teams kind of come together in various ways. A lot of people may not know each other very well. And so what would you say about conflict and stress as they're kind of spending all this time just in a condensed way, right, over the course of a week, like every moment together? Should they expect conflict and stress through that? And if so, how to handle that?
Yeah, it's a given that just about every trip is going to have some measure of drama, and it can best be prevented by talking about it before the trip, having what's called a trip covenant that everybody signs that says things like, if I'm starting to be irritated with somebody, I'll go to them before I talk to someone else about them. Triangularization, that's called. So you come up with a covenant, and again, these kinds of documents they're available lots of places. So you set that up ahead of time. Then of course, then you still have to apply it when you get on the field. But the most important thing is confidentiality. Keep the conflict to just the two people or maybe the three people that are involved. Don't let it out to the rest of the group, and then to deal with it soon. If you start to see something coming, then you address it. I remember one time we had this incredibly talkative person, and he irritated me because he talked so much to me. And then I just took him aside. It was just like Monday or Tuesday, and I said, this could be an issue, and I would really like it if you just see if you could, curtail your thoughts a little bit. It's fine that you talk to people, but be aware of how long you speak and so forth. And he took it without getting mad at me. I don't think he enjoyed hearing that, but anyway, it's just an example of before somebody like blows up at the end of the trip because this guy's driving them crazy. At least you try to sort of head it off at the pass.
At the beginning, yeah.
Yeah, and the same as in the devotional times, it's sort of a staff meeting as well. And if you see certain things, certain trends that could lead to problems, then you mention them, and that's the easy way. You just make a general statement of the whole group. You're not looking at anybody in particular, but you're hoping maybe there's three or four people that are kind of leaning this way, and you're hoping to correct their course before it does become an issue.
Yeah.
But it's going to happen. It's just, you get 12 or 15 bodies, working together and seeing each other nonstop. It's just a natural outgrowth of human behavior.
Yeah, well, good to know. It's something that should be expected, and then you can be thinking ahead of time about how to handle that, and how, especially how to handle that early on before it becomes a big problem. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So now, when the trip is over, what are some best practices for reaping the benefits of the trip for each trip member?
Yeah, I am a big fan of debriefs, but debriefs that occur prior to the end of the trip. Once you land back wherever you came from, people go everywhere. They've got their regular lives back, and quite possibly they were exhausted from if they've put themselves into the trip along the lines that we've been describing. So we had typically we've had like a 4 or 5 question debrief. We give that to people on Thursday morning if we're leaving on Friday night or Saturday. And we say, fill this out and give it to the trip leader by a certain deadline, and then we're going to talk to you about it, usually during the plane ride home or maybe during the layovers. And that is a wonderful way, just a wonderful way of reaping the benefits. And I have had people make some amazing decisions during those discussions. I mean, people
Yeah.
have agreed to taking more steps of leadership in the church, or again, committing to personal Bible study. It's the one of the richest parts of the trip for the trip leader. But it's easy. You're tired, and you can say, "Oh, I'll take care of that when I get home." It's easy to pass up, and you shouldn't, because you'll lose the opportunity for the to process it with the individual, and you won't have, as a leader, you won't get the reinforcement that is so precious and so special when uh, right on the heels of the trip concluding.
Yeah.
So then, but then just one more thing just to talk about, and I know we're getting close on our time, but you definitely want to try to have some kind of a celebration, some kind of an event where you get together with everyone, you have some food, you have individuals tell some stories from the trip. Maybe you get if it's like typically 2 or 3 weeks after the trip, you write the trip host, you say, has anything happened, since we left, you get any feedback, and often that provides some encouraging information or even some great story. Like we had one woman a Muslim woman who got involved with the sponsoring church when she was just a patient initially. So you get reports like that, and that's an encouragement. And then you can bring in supporters and others that have prayed for the trip. You invite as many people as possible, and have a
Yeah.
good meal, and 40 minutes of photos and testimonies, that kind of thing. That's worth a lot. And it also gives you an opportunity to maybe recruit some of those folks that were just financial or prayer supporters. You can
Mm.
start laying the groundwork for encouraging them to take a trip the next time. Because again, typically you're going to repeat where you're going. You're going to repeat the
Yep.
program, whether it's medical or educational, whatever it is. And so, people are hearing it, and it's inspiring. So you maybe
Yeah.
encourage them to start planning on going themselves.
Yeah, I love the intentionality on the backside of the trip, even just on the way home, leaning into that, having conversations. 'Cause it's so easy when you get back to just fall right back into the hustle and bustle of just like day to day life, and to lose sight of that. And before you know it, weeks and months have gone by, and you never had an opportunity to do that celebratory work, and bring people into that. And like you're saying, it can lead to so many more fruitful outcomes for people who weren't actually on the trip too. It's beautiful. Yeah. So maybe last question here: what resources would you recommend for both trip leaders and even just participants?
All right. Oh, I'll look at my list here. I mentioned the book by Dearborn, Short-Term Missions Workbook.
Yep.
There's Corbett and Fickert have a famous book called When Helping Hurts. That's a
Great book.
that's a pretty challenging book, but important. One that's not so well known that I think is great is called Now What. It's by Gary Green. He was a college professor, but it's a great self-study after the mission trip is over. And I've actually gone through that 2 different times. I filled out the questions twice in after different experiences, and it was very helpful. Um, David Livermore, he's pretty well known. He's done Serving with Eyes Wide Open. That's a pretty frank assessment of short-term missions, and it pulls no punches when talking about some of the downfalls. And then the last one, I would say, I mentioned Standards of Excellence before, SOE, but then there's one called Maximum Impact Short-Term Missions. That's by 3 different authors, but Maximum Impact Short-Term Missions. Just one other quick thing on the
Yep.
return. I always have someone designated to write a one-page report on the trip. And we do that very quickly. In fact, it's often written on the plane on the way home, but we
Yeah.
then give that to all the trip members because we want them to send a letter of reporting to their supporters, prayer
Right.
supporters, financial people, so they can lift paragraphs of that out. They can obviously put their own information in, But we write a report not only to distribute for the church or the school, but so that our team members have some good information, some solid and well structured content describing the trip that they can use with their supporters.
Yeah, love that. Well, Doug, thank you so much. Just tons of wisdom here. Obviously, so many little nuggets to take away to improve short-term trips. So just appreciate you taking the time to just share that experience with us. I know we're going to all benefit from that a bunch on our future short-term trips. And to all of you who attended, thanks for being here. We hope that this conversation was useful and beneficial for you guys. If you're looking for opportunities to serve, obviously check out the MedSend website and kind of read more about them, but then also you can download the GMHC Go app and find just dozens and dozens of trips that are specific to you. Find some things that are that work for you and your specialty, and hope you can find the next step there. And we hope to see you next month for another virtual event. These happen about the last week of each month. And next month, we're talking about medical missions and preventing burnout and nurturing resilience. So we hope to see you there for that one. And we'll see you then.